I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, set the glass on the kitchen counter, and stood there reading my daughter-in-law's text message for the 3rd time. Not because I didn't understand it, because I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining it. Honestly, Ray, we've been talking about this for a while. The house is getting too big for one person. There are really nice assisted living places nearby. You'd have people your age to talk to. It would be better for everyone. My name is Ray Calloway. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years building road for this county. I have a pension, a paid-off house, and until about 4 minutes ago, I believed I had a family. I put the phone face down on the counter. Then I picked it back up and read it again. Better for everyone. My son had not sent that message himself. He never did his own dirty work. That hadn't changed since he was 14 years old and sent his little sister to ask if he could borrow my truck instead of asking me himself. Some things don't change. People show you who they are in small moments, and then one day a big moment comes along and you realize you've been watching the pattern your whole life and just calling it something else. I drank the bourbon, poured another, did not drink it. Instead, I walked down the hall to the room I use as an office. Used to be my son Nate's bedroom, back when he actually lived here, back when this house meant something to him, and I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. The one with the lock on it. The one my late wife Helen insisted we buy because she said important papers needed to be treated like important papers. Helen had been right about most things. I pulled out a green folder. Inside it was the deed to this house, the title to my truck, my will as it currently stood, and a letter from my financial advisor that I had never shown anyone in my family. I sat down in my chair and I started thinking, let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the before. Nate was a good kid. I mean that genuinely, not in the way people say it at funerals when they're trying to be kind. He was curious and funny, and he used to sit on the tailgate of my truck when he was 8 years old and ask me how roads were made, not to be polite, because he actually wanted to know. I'd explain the layers, the subgrade, the base course, the asphalt, and he'd ask follow-up questions that impressed even me. Helen and I weren't rich. We were comfortable. We worked hard, spent carefully, and we made sure Nate had what he needed, not everything he wanted. There's a difference, and we understood that. He went to state. We paid for 3 years, and he earned a partial scholarship for the 4th. He graduated with a degree in business administration and came home that summer proud and a little lost the way most 22-year-olds are. That was fine. That was normal. Then he met Christy. I don't want to be unfair to Christy. She came from a different kind of family, the kind where money was discussed openly at the dinner table, where vacations were planned a year in advance, where the question wasn't if you remodeled the kitchen but which contractor you used. She wasn't a bad person. She just had an appetite that Nate on his own never would have developed. They got married when Nate was 26. We helped with the wedding, $12,000, which was real money for us, and we gave it without complaint because Helen said our son only gets married once, and I agreed. We helped with the down payment on their first house 2 years later, $50,000. Again, we gave it. Helen and I talked about it for a long time first, and we decided that's what you do. You help your kids get started. That's part of the job. Then Helen got sick. Ovarian cancer, stage 3, diagnosed on a Tuesday in March, like the universe had no sense of timing at all. We spent the next 2 years fighting it the way you fight something you love, with everything you have, even when you know you might lose. I took early retirement to be home with her. I drove her to every appointment. I learned more about oncology than any road builder ever should have to know. Nate and Christy visited on holiday. They sent flowers when Helen had her second surgery. They called on Sundays, usually for about 10 minutes, usually while one of them was also doing something else. I could hear the TV, or the dishwasher, or Christy asking Nate something about groceries while he was still on the phone with me. Helen passed on a Thursday morning in October 3 years ago. She was 64 years old. She had held my hand through the night, and somewhere around 5 in the morning she just quietly stopped. The house has been mine alone since then, which apparently had become a problem. Nate called the next morning, not to explain the text, to act like it hadn't happened. "Hey, Dad, how are you?" I said I was fine. "Good, good. So listen, we were thinking maybe you could come for dinner Sunday. Christy's doing her pot roast." I said that sounded nice. "Great. So we'll see you around 6? "Nate," I said, "I got Christy's message last night." Silence, the particular silence of a man deciding which version of himself to be in the next 5 seconds. "Oh," he said, "yeah. We've been talking about it for a while, Dad. It's not a big deal. We just thought, she said it would be better for everyone." Another silence. "Well," he said, "the house is a lot for one person, and you're not getting any younger." 67. I'd been running 5 miles a week since I was 50. I'd repaired my own roof the previous spring. I'd driven to Colorado and back in August to visit my college roommate. 1,400 miles round trip, no problem. I was not getting any younger, that was true. Neither was anyone. "Where would I go?" I asked. "There are some really nice places, Dad. We actually looked at a couple. There's one in Millbrook. It's like a community. They have activities, a pool." "I have a pool," I said. That was a lie. I have a above-ground pool that's been deflated in the garage for 4 years. But the point stood. "Dad, come on. We just want what's best for you." "We." He kept saying we, like his own opinion had been absorbed into a single collective pronoun somewhere around the time he signed the joint tax return. "I appreciate that," I said. "I'll think about it." I hung up and sat in Helen's chair. I still think of it as Helen's chair, the one by the window she liked because the light was good for reading. I thought about what I was actually dealing with. It wasn't the assisted living suggestion that bothered me most. It was the assumption underneath it. The assumption that my house, my life, my next chapter were variables to be optimized in someone else's equation. That the correct answer to the question, "What do we do about Ray?" could be texted to me on a Wednesday evening like a scheduling update. I thought about what Helen would say. I was pretty sure I knew. She would say, "You've spent 67 years learning how things are built. You know better than anyone that the time to reinforce a structure is before it fails, not after." I opened the green folder again, and then I called my lawyer. Ted Briggs had been my attorney for 19 years. He was 71, semi-retired, and he had the energy of a man who had long since stopped pretending to tolerate nonsense out of politeness. I drove to his office on a Thursday, told him everything, and watched him listen the way good lawyers listen, without expression, without interruption, absorbing. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "So what do you want to do?" "I want to understand what I have," I said, "and then I want to make sure it's arranged the way I actually intend it to be arranged, not the way anyone else has assumed it's arranged." He nodded slowly. "Your will currently leaves the house and the majority of liquid assets to Nate. I know you want to revisit that. I want to understand my options." We talked for 2 hours. I learned things that afternoon I should have understood 20 years earlier about trusts, about how property transfers work, about what estate planning actually means versus what most people assume it means over Thanksgiving dinner. I drove home with 4 pages of handwritten notes and a very clear picture. The house was mine. The money was mine. All of it. The retirement accounts, the savings, the small investment portfolio. Helen and I had quietly built over 30 years of careful living. It was mine, and it would go wherever I directed it to go, and no one had any claim on any of it until I decided otherwise. I had been operating, I realized, under a kind of invisible debt I never agreed to carry. The assumption that because I had helped Nate over the years, the wedding, the down payment, the small loans that were never paid back and never discussed, I was somehow obligated to continue, that the help I had given had established a precedent, that the pattern meant something it didn't actually mean. The debt wasn't mine. It had never been mine. I called Ted the next morning and told him what I wanted to do. Sunday dinner was pot roast and tension. Their house was nice, a 4-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood where everyone had the same mailbox and a different SUV. Christy had set the table properly, with cloth napkins, which she only did when she wanted something to feel formal. "So have you thought any more about what we discussed?" she asked, before we'd even finished the salad. "I have," I said. Nate looked at his plate. And, Christy said, I've been doing some thinking about a lot of things, actually, I said. My finances, my house, my plans going forward. I had a long meeting with Ted Briggs this week. Something shifted in Christy's expression. Subtle, the way a weather vane moves before the wind picks up. Ted Briggs, she repeated. My lawyer. You've met him at the Christmas party, I think. Years ago. What kind of meeting? Nate asked. He was looking at me now. Estate planning, I said. I took a bite of pot roast. It was actually very good. Christy was an excellent cook, which I'd always acknowledge, and she'd never seemed to appreciate my noticing. I realized I hadn't updated several things since your mother passed. It was time. That's responsible, Christy said carefully. I thought so. We ate in silence for a moment. So, Nate said, with the forced lightness of a man trying to land a plane in bad weather, did you make changes? Several, I said. I set up a charitable remainder trust. Part of it goes to the county library. Your mother used to volunteer there on Saturdays, you might remember. Part of it goes to the oncology unit at St. Michael's where she was treated. I also made some adjustments to the property arrangements. Christy set down her fork. What kind of adjustments? She asked. I'm keeping the house, I said simply, which, based on my current health and the structural integrity of the building, I expect to be quite some time. Dad, nobody said you had to. You suggested assisted living, I said, not unkindly, just clearly. That was the first time in my life anyone has suggested I needed to be managed. I want to be honest with you both about how that landed. Nate opened his mouth, closed it. I've spent 40 years taking care of things, I continued. My crew, my equipment, my family. I replaced the water heater in that house myself last February. I painted the back porch in June. I make my own appointments, I manage my own money, and I have a very full life that I am living without any apparent difficulty. So when I got that text, I wasn't hurt. I was clarified. Clarified, Christy repeated, about what certain assumptions had been, and about the fact that those assumptions needed to be corrected. The dinner ended shortly after that. Not dramatically. No one raised their voice. I helped carry the dishes to the sink, thanked Christy for the meal, told Nate I'd call him during the week, and drove home through the November dark with the radio off. Nate called on Tuesday. Without Christy on the line, his voice sounded younger, more like himself. I owe you an apology, he said. I waited. Christy was the one who brought it up first, the assisted living thing. And I went along with it because it was easier than having the conversation. And I knew that was wrong when I was doing it, and I did it anyway. A pause. That's not an excuse. That's just what happened. I know, I said. With the will and everything, is that Nate, I said. The money and the house were never the point. They were never something you were owed. Your mother and I always intended to help you when we could, and we always did. That part doesn't change. I paused. What changes is the assumption that the help is automatic. That being my son is a contract I signed on your behalf without reading. He was quiet for a long moment. I haven't been a good son, he said finally. Since Mom died, I told myself you were fine because it was easier than asking if you actually were. I am fine, I said. But yes, I would have liked to be asked. That was the thing I hadn't expected to feel. Not anger. Just the low, steady ache of being invisible to someone you watched take their first steps. Of being reduced, in the space of a text message, from a person into a logistical problem. I told him that. Not all of it. Some things you say clearly and some things you just carry in the shape of your words. But enough. He listened. That was new, or maybe it wasn't new. Maybe it was old, the boy who used to ask about road layers coming back through the adult who'd temporarily forgotten how. The months after that were not a movie. There was no dramatic reconciliation scene. No tearful Christmas where everything was resolved and the music swelled. What there was, Nate started calling on Thursday evenings, just to talk. Not about anything particular, about work, about a podcast he'd been listening to, about the fact that his neighbor had planted something in the yard that might be bamboo and was definitely going to be a problem. Ordinary things, the kind of conversations that accumulate into a relationship or rebuild one, the same way you lay a road. one layer at a time, each one supporting the weight of what comes next. Christy called me in January, which surprised me. She said she'd been thinking about what I said at dinner. She said she understood now that what she'd suggested had come from a place of, she searched for the word, impatience, rather than care. She wasn't wrong about that. I appreciated that she said it. I'm not sure I fully trust Christy yet. I'm not sure I need to. Trust is built the same way roads are built, and we're still in the early stages. What I do know is this: I live in my house. My house on my land with Helen's rose bushes still in the side yard that I trim every spring because she planted them the year Nate was born, and they are not going anywhere. I have my pension and my savings and my investments and a charitable trust that will outlast all of us. I have a lawn I mow myself and a truck I maintain myself and a life that is full in ways that are mine and no one else's. I did not need to be angry to reclaim it. I did not need to threaten anyone or punish anyone or burn anything down. I just needed to be clear. There is a particular kind of man who gets to 67 and realizes that the years of silence, of giving without asking for acknowledgement, of helping without requiring gratitude, of absorbing small indignities because the moment never seemed right to address them. Those years were not wisdom, they were habit, and habits can be changed. Helen knew that. She tried to teach me. I was a slow student. I got there eventually. Last Sunday, Nate drove over without being asked, and we cleaned out the gutters together, which needed doing. And afterward, we sat on the back porch with 2 beers and watched the light change the way it does in late afternoon in October. That particular gold that doesn't last. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. He looked over at me at some point and said, "I'm sorry, Dad. For real." I nodded, because I knew he was, and because that was enough. The house still stands, so do we.